All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Denyse Schrenker, and I am the Horticulture and Small Acreage Extension Agent for Eagle County. Our office is located over in Eagle, Colorado, but you can reach me by email or phone call anytime. If you have any questions or are having any trouble hearing me, please write that in the chat at any time, and Kathy will let me know and we'll get it figured out. So today I'm just going to go over some basic seed saving information. And I've shared my screen here, which is a PDF that we'll share with you after the presentation, so you can access it anytime. All right, grab my clipboard. All right, so one of the first things you want to do, seems like a sort of common sense thing, but you want to make sure to collect seed from the best, healthiest plants there are. So, make sure not to save any seed from diseased plants. When you're saving seed, it's kind of like doing your own at-home breeding program. So you want to make sure that you're choosing the best, most vigorous plants to plant again the following year. Yeah. And so another thing that's really important to keep in mind is to produce offspring that's similar to the parent plant. The parent needs to be pollinated by the same variety. So this can be a little bit confusing to think about, but let's say you have two kinds of zucchini in your garden. You need to make sure that the zucchini is pollinated by that same variety, or you'll get cross-pollination, and then when you go to plant out your seeds the following year, your new plants might not look like the parent plants. So if you have any questions about that, please feel free to let me know or enter them in the chat. So plants that are self-pollinated are more likely to breed true. And this just means that when you plant them out the following year, they're more likely to look like the parent plant. So plants that are wind or insect pollinated are easily cross-pollinated. And when that happens, when cross-pollination happens, then the seed that you collect and plant out the following year might not look like the parent plant. So cross-pollination between different varieties needs to be prevented to get seed that will produce plants similar to the parent plant. And you can avoid cross-pollination by either separating varieties by distance, by pollination time. So you can start some plants a little earlier and wait to start some a little later so that they're producing pollen at different times. Or you can exclude them from each other with something like row cover. And so we're going to talk about this a little more. So we're going to go into these different types of pollination methods now. And so that's kind of at the bottom of the screen here. So plants that are self-pollinated, the seed reliably produces plants that are similar to the parent. So these are kind of the easiest ones to start with. There's not much extra work you have to do for these. And some of these types of plants are all kinds of beans, all kinds of peas, tomatoes, lettuces, chicory, and endive. So if you're new to saving seeds, I'd recommend starting with some of these. They'll be the easiest to get a offspring that looks like the parent plant. And then moving on to wind-pollinated plants. So the wind can move pollen a really far distance. So you need a mile in between these different varieties to completely avoid cross-pollination. And this is pretty hard if you have a neighbor right next door that's also growing the same vegetable, or if you're in a community garden. So one way to do this is you can try to stagger the pollen shed, or easiest, use row cover. And some of these wind pollinated plants are beets, Swiss chard, corn, and spinach. All right. Scroll my screen down. It's a little bright here, so I cannot see my cursor very well. So sorry if this takes me a moment to see. There we go. All right, so the next group is insect pollinated plants. And to avoid cross-pollination between varieties, these ones need to be spaced about a 1/4 mile apart. Or you can stagger pollen shed time to plant things either earlier or later, or use row cover. And some examples of insect pollinated plants are, there's a lot of them. I'd say the vast majority of them are insect pollinated. There's asparagus, kohlrabi, broccoli. So all of your brassicas, you know, like your broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, cabbage, those things. Onions, parsley, carrots, celeries, most of the squashes, rutabaga, eggplant, turnips. So it's a pretty big list of them. And another thing to kind of consider with these is that all of the squashes will also cross-pollinate each other. So not only do you need to kind of keep varieties separate, you also need to keep your different squash species separate, like your zucchinis and your summer squashes, your other summer squashes and your winter squashes. They can all cross-pollinate. Same with all of the, what we call kind of the mustard crops. So that's the broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, Brussels sprouts, kale, collard greens, and mustard greens. Those are all actually different cultivars of the same species. So they can really easily cross-pollinate each other. So that's why these plants can be a little bit more tricky when you're first starting out. You just need to keep this in mind and try to exclude them from each other. Or you'll end up with plants next year that do not look at all like the parent plant that you were hoping for. So this is probably the trickiest thing when it comes to saving seed, is just keeping these different varieties separated so that you get plants that are true to what you are looking for. So does anybody have any questions about that? No? All right.
I do have a question. You were talking about separating by distance, but you were talking about covering the plant some way or creating some kind of barrier. What is that?
Yeah, so you can use something like row cover, and that's just a really thin piece of material that you can buy at online at like a Johnny's or a Gempler's or something like that, or some nurseries have it. And if you only need a little bit, quite a few nurseries will give you kind of some leftover pieces that they have. And it's just a thin cloth. It still lets light through, so you can actually leave it on your plants all year round if you want. Or you can just put it on right before they start to, like right when they're starting to flower, and then take it off when they're finished flowering. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that was very helpful. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, and I personally love row cover for this area also, just because it gives plants it keeps them a little warmer at night. If you have the light cloth, it still lets plenty of light in, but it also helps prevent sun scald on like your peppers and tomatoes. And it also helps prevent like wind damage. It increases the humidity a little bit around the plants. So I'm a big advocate of row cover as well. But off topic. Oh. Then once you kind of have your pollination method figured out, and you've got a plan for that, then comes to harvesting methods. And there's two kind of methods. They're both really easy. And I'll start with actually the one on the right first, the dry method. So this method you just use for plants with dry seeds. So they don't have like a fleshy fruit covering them. And so the examples of this would be peas, beans, peppers actually fall into this, greens, mustards. So all of the mustard crops is like broccoli, cauliflower, kale, those ones again, carrots, your root vegetables, and most herbs. And the biggest thing to do with this is to just be patient and allow the seed to fully reach maturity and dry on the plant, but collect it before the seed drops to the ground. And so this can be a little tricky figuring out. I just go out, once it kind of starts getting close, I go out and check every few days. And I kind of just see if you take, I have yarrow here just because it was ready in the Are you still online?
I am.
Okay.
We have some technical difficulties because I insisted we do this in the sun.
Should I join your
Sure.
hotspot?
Sure.
Or just take over your?
You want to just take this over?
Sure.
Okay. To have a seat on that thing, it's much better. So, see, it's recording.
All right. Sorry about that. My phone overheated. Maybe I'll let you keep yours in a shady spot. So I am just going to take over Kathy's computer here. And let's see. And can you all hear me? Okay.
Yes, great. I can.
Wanted to make sure before I started going again. All right. So for the dry method of harvesting, you can just take, let's see, and I've got to figure out where I put my yarrow here. Here we go. Take your plant and kind of lightly squeeze it. And if things are falling onto your plate, then it's probably ready. So the dry method is pretty easy once you know what you're looking for and kind of get that timing down. And I always find that I have to wait a lot longer than I would think. But once you do that, it's pretty easy. So I don't know if you can see all the little seeds that are falling onto my plate from this yarrow plant. I'll put it down now. Let's see. Hopefully you guys can see that. But those are all the little seeds from that. And a lot of times if a plant is ready, I can tell it's ready, I'll just take an envelope, like a paper envelope, and put them in there and then kind of squeeze it in the envelope so I don't lose anything. And that method has worked really well for me. But the big thing is just being patient and waiting until the seeds are ready to come off the plant. So
I have a question.
Yeah.
If you, let's say you have cauliflower, so you have one cauliflower and you have all of the leafy parts of it. If you harvest the cauliflower, will it still flower out? Or do you have to?
So Kathy asked about if you have a cauliflower and you go ahead and let's see, you're saying,
So you're going to eat the cauliflower.
oh, okay, yeah. She asked if you harvest the cauliflower, the part that you eat, will it still flower out? Unfortunately, no. So that is kind of the unfortunate thing with seed saving. You do have to sacrifice a few vegetables to get the seed. So when you're planting your garden, if you're really, this is something you're really interested in doing, kind of keep that in mind and maybe plant a couple extra, because you're going to need to sacrifice a few of the vegetables or fruits from it. So yeah, good question. All right. And then for the other harvesting method, so this is the wet method. And this is for plants that have fleshy fruits, like tomatoes, cucumbers, your summer squashes, winter squashes, melons, eggplant, those kind of things. And so I'll start with tomatoes because they're just a little different. So the best tomato seeds save best when they're allowed to ferment for 3 to 5 days. And this might sound kind of complicated, but it's pretty easy. You just have to scoop the seeds and pulp and place it in water. Let it sit for 3 to 5 days in a warmish place. If mold forms over the top, that's fine. It should do that. And then your good viable seeds are going to sink to the bottom of the cup. So after 3 to 5 days, you'll just pour off the pulp and the non-viable seeds that are on the top there, and then collect the seeds that fall to the bottom of the cup. And after you do this, I think it's also best then to kind of rinse them with a 20% bleach solution because that kills some of our pathogens. And then also, after you rinse it in that, then rinse it in clean water and allow to dry. And, ooh, I just saw somebody needs to be admitted. All right, there we go. So, and when you're drying these, you want to make sure to dry them in a shady spot. You don't want to dry them in direct sunlight or like heat them up. So don't dry them, try to dry them in the oven or anything like that. Just spread them out on a paper towel and let them dry in a kind of shady or dappled sunlight. So that was with the tomatoes. You got to let them sit for a little bit in the water, let them ferment a little. But with other fleshy fruits, you don't need to let them sit so long. You can just wash them off. And if they're pretty, if the pulp was easy to clean off, you can just let them dry. Or you can also let them sit in the water for, it really doesn't take long, 10 minutes even, up to an hour. And you'll get that seed separation, same as with the tomatoes. So it might, I think you guys can see here, but I've got some seeds and pulp at the top. And then I have some at the bottom, and these came from a zucchini. And so these seeds at the top are the ones that are not viable. So the seeds at the top, you just want to get rid of them. And these seeds at the bottom are the ones you want to use. And so I think this is a great way just to kind of right off the bat, separate out some of those viable and not viable seeds. And then, so after you've rinsed them off and separated your good seeds from your bad seeds, you can, once again, rinse them in a 20% bleach solution, then rinse in clean water and allow it to dry. And something that's going to make sure that you get more mature seeds is to leave your cucumbers, melons, all your summer squashes on the vine until it freezes, just like you would with winter squash, because like for cucumbers especially, when we're harvesting them, when they're ripe and ready to eat, their seed is not mature yet. So it needs a little more time to mature. So that's one way to make sure that you're going to have mature seeds that will germinate the next year. And then for eggplants, you kind of wait until they're brownish and a little shriveled, and that's when their seeds should be matured.
Also on the vine?
Yeah, also on the plant. Yeah. Yeah. And one thing I forgot to just notice, I forgot to mention with peppers, you also want to wait until they're a little wrinkly. I don't know if you can see the wrinkles, but I'm sure you've all seen peppers that have gotten a little wrinkly. And you also need to make sure that they've reached their mature color. So that's going to be red or yellow or orange. So green peppers are not mature. Even jalapenos and your hot peppers, if you leave them, they will turn red eventually. So you need to wait for this red color for your peppers. For peas and beans, you want to wait and let the pod dry on the vine. And once the pod's brown and dried out, and you can kind of shake it and hear them rattling, then you know those are ready. So after we've harvested and let our seeds totally dry, then it's time for storage. And for storage, you want to store them in like a paper envelope, or if you have fabric bag or something like that, as long as it's not plastic, because we don't want to, there might be some moisture that's still in there, and you don't want to trap that inside. And then you want to store it in a cool, dark place. Refrigerator is great. Some people store them in the freezer, but if there's any moisture left in that seed, when it freezes, it can damage the seed. So I think the refrigerator is a safer bet. And then two kind of potential pitfalls that you might run into. If you have a plant that is a hybrid, so if your seed package says hybrid or F1 hybrid, something along those lines, you don't want to save that seed. It won't work for saving seed, because when you plant it back out, you're going to get tons of different variations, because hybrid plants are made by crossing two inbred lines. And so when you cross the two inbred lines, the seed, that first generation of seed, produces really homogeneous, nice plants. It's called the F1 generation, if you want to get into the genetics. But then when you cross those F1s with each other, their offspring are all over the place. And also a lot of times with hybrids, you might cross them, and sometimes the seed from the F1 generation is sterile. So it doesn't work for seed saving. So make sure you're not trying to save a hybrid. And then the other potential pitfall would be biennial plants. Some things aren't going to produce seed in one season. And so some of the common biennials are like turnips, beets, a lot of the Swiss chards, cabbage, onions, kales. A lot of the mustard crops are, not all of them. But so if you got to the end of the year and your plant never seeded out, it's probably because it was a biennial. And for those, you have to try to overwinter them. And here it can be a little tricky, but there's actually quite a few things that will overwinter, because a lot of these biennials are also our most cold hardy crops. So like onions, we can overwinter onions here. Carrots, I've had one person who's successfully done it. Same with beets. Spinach, lettuces are really easy to do. And for those, you just want to mulch them in really well, and then maybe put some row cover over it or something extra to protect it. But mostly mulch it in really well with straw. And then don't forget to remove that mulch in the spring. And they should, in the spring when it starts to really heat up, they should bolt and produce seed. But that's one thing that you might run into with the biennial plants. You wait all season long and it never flowers. And you're just wondering, why didn't this thing ever flower? It needs to overwinter. You can also, if you want to, for things like cabbage, it doesn't overwinter as well. You can actually dig the plant out and just save it in it needs to be like 32 to 45 degrees over winter. So it can be a little hard, but you could try to save it like in your refrigerator. If you have a really big refrigerator that you can fit plants in. So for those, you can do that. Or for the root crops are easier because you can just save your bulb or your tuber and then plant that back next year, and it will flower. So the root crops are much easier to dig up and save over winter than the like cabbage or something like that. But a lot of the root crops, actually, if you leave them and mulch them in also, they'll go ahead and send up new growth in the spring. So those you can also just kind of mulch in really well and hope that they make it. So, and those were kind of the main things that I wanted to cover, and I'd like to answer any questions you might have now. Or any comments if anybody's tried something and found that this method really worked well for them. Feel free to share. Anyone have questions? Oh, one other thing. When you save your seed and you put it in an envelope or whatever bag, whatever you're going to save it in, make sure to label it. You might be like, oh yeah, I'll remember, no problem. But when spring comes, if you're like me, you won't remember. You're like, what was this from again? I'm pretty sure this is a tomato seed, but so make sure to write the year that you harvested it and what vegetable it is, and then the variety. Sometimes it can help to write the exact date that you harvested it, just so you know for next year. Like on some of those, the dry harvest method ones, so have a better idea of what date to really be looking at those plants to harvest. The wet, yeah. I will happily repeat that. And I'll send, we'll send this PowerPoint that has that detailed out for you, so you don't have to try to remember it. But for the wet method, these are all of your fruits and vegetables that have like a fleshy fruit around them. So tomatoes, cucumbers, melons, summer squashes, winter squashes, that kind of thing. And for the tomatoes, you want to let them sit. So you scoop out the seeds and the pulp and put it in water, and you let it sit for 3 to 5 days. It needs that little time to ferment, and you put it in kind of a warm place and just leave it for 3 to 5 days. And then you're going to pour off those, the bad seeds will rise to the top along with the pulp. You'll just pour that off and then collect the good seeds at the bottom. And then do a rinse with a 20% bleach solution. Rinse with clean water, spread out on a paper towel, and just make sure to let them really dry out well. And for the squashes and things like that, same process, except you don't need to let it sit for 3 to 5 days. You only need to let it sit. These ones I have here separated out in, I think it was probably 10 minutes. So 10 minutes, and then you can pour off this top part. It's got some non-viable seeds along with some pulp. Pour that off and keep these seeds that are at the bottom. And then same process from there. Rinse with the 20% bleach, rinse with clean water, spread out to let dry.
What about sunflowers and collecting sunflower seeds? Is that like a real thing?
Yeah. So Kathy asked about sunflowers and collecting sunflower seeds. So it's the same as it'll be the dry method. And for those, it's pretty much the same. You wait until you can, if it's really hard to get them off, they might not be ready yet. But once you can kind of pop them off there, they're ready to collect. Also, sunflowers, if you have an area where you just want them to come back every year, they're pretty good at self-seeding. So you can kind of just let them self-seed, or if you want to, you have a few that did really well, if you want to remove all the ones that did not quite as well, and get rid of those so that they're not adding their genetic material to your next generation, then you can kind of do a little at-home breeding program that way. If biennials put out new growth, does that interrupt the seed production? So it shouldn't. It should not. So on some of the ones like cauliflower, it'll put out a little new growth, but not super great, like not quite enough to really get a lot of seeds out of. So yes, yeah, it won't, or I said that backwards. No, it will not interrupt your seed production. Yeah, let's see. Any idea of what I can do with an overabundance of dill seeds? You know, I have the exact same problem. If anyone else has any great ideas for things to do with dill, I'd love to hear them. That's one of the ones that every year I seem to get more and more dill seeds, and yeah, I think I have a lifetime amount of them. Yeah, so unfortunately I don't have any good ideas of what to do with those. Just tell all your friends. Yeah, just give them away. If you find something to do with them also, let me know. if you have any, come up with any good ideas. And also, so I talked mostly about vegetables, but for flowers, it's the dry method as well. So you do the exact same thing. And some of the flowers, the only thing that's a little different with the flowers is especially things that we kind of think of as native wildflowers. A lot of them need to undergo, the seed itself needs to undergo a cold period, a kind of cold moist period. The easiest way to do this is just to plant plant like half of them in the fall and half of them in the spring and see what works best. Any other questions or thoughts to add? And I'll make sure and give Kathy my contact information that she can send out with this handout. So then you can, if you think of any questions later, you're like, oh my gosh, I have to ask that. Feel free to contact me. And there is in the handout, I'll just show you the picture of it. There's a QR code here at the bottom. And then the website link is also next to it. And that will take you to another handout that CSU has, a little fact sheet about seed saving that's got some extra information as well.
Is there anything we should be doing about the soil and getting ready for put the garden to bed at this point?
Yeah, so Kathy asked about anything to do with the soil and like putting the garden to bed right now. For soil, now's a good time to get it tested because you can kind of prepare and be ready for next year. But I personally recommend waiting to do any tillage or cultivation until next year. For our soil, we want to kind of reduce cultivation as much as possible because it can kind of break up the soil structure. And we want to build good soil structure. So if you can only cultivate once per year, that's better. So that's why I just wait until spring. You can do it in the fall, but I find that once spring comes around, you usually have to kind of do it again anyway. So I personally like to wait until fall. But for other things to be doing now, putting the garden to bed, clearing out any diseased plant material, and that diseased material, you don't want to compost it. Unfortunately, our compost piles don't get hot enough to kill a lot of those pathogens. So you just kind of have to dispose of it. And then other things to be doing now, let's see, a lot of getting caught up on any weeding you might have gotten behind on. Now's a great time to do that. If the plant has already flowered, make sure that you remove that flower, that seed head. And you can either just bring a bag out with you, like a trash bag, and put it in the trash bag. That works best because, again, you don't want to accidentally spread those seeds around. So you just need to cut off the seed heads for those. Yeah. All right. Last burning questions. Best planting time. Yep, for the wildflower seeds. For a lot of them, not all of them need that cold period, but a lot of them do, so fall. But like I said, I'd save half and then do it in the spring, just to really cover your bases. Oh. All right. I will turn it back over to Kathy then. And thanks so much for joining in.
Thank you, Denise. All right, everyone. If you have any further questions, please, you have my email at the library. Please give me a call or shoot me an email, and I'll forward information and all of Denise's contact stuff over to you. If you have questions, we did record this, so we'll see if it works, and we'll get it posted, and there'll be information on the Basalt Library website on how to view it at a later time, or tell your friends about it if they're curious. Thanks so much for joining us. Have a great afternoon.